Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first meeting of our Electric Utility and Local Government Electric Vehicle Working Group. Over the course of the working group, we have a goal of facilitating this working group of regional electric utilities and local governments to expand utility roles with electric vehicles, including incentives, rates, policies, and programs through a facilitated peer exchange. There's a few objectives that we want to try to cover within the working group itself. First, we would like to address challenges related to electric utilities and transportation, electrification, provide support and resources to help guide utilities forward, and finally, identify solutions, strategies, and best practices using the collaborative feedback gathered from the working group itself. We're focusing on electric vehicles today because at the beginning of this year, we released a survey for utilities to be able to monitor and showcase what programs and topic areas they have interest in and what programs and topic areas they currently do. Within that, there was many utilities that showed a strong interest in learning more about how they can get involved with the electric vehicles within their operations. Why it's important, many utilities are facing significant changes given the increased focus on environmentally conscious operations over the entire scale, including reducing overall emissions, distributed generation, including solar application and increase in solar capacity, new loads, which is electric vehicles. As more electric vehicles get on the market, the greater load that will be impacted with the grid itself, as well as new customer technologies, including smart homes. One of these things that utilities are trying to do is trying to integrate and try to figure out how all of these new significant changes can work together to actually create a stronger, more modernized grid. Utilities can play a critical role in EV success by incentivizing consumers through purchasing a new EV, discounting the purchase of an EV, or EV charging equipment. They can help protect and modernize the grid by using EVs and the batteries that EVs have as a resiliency tool for the grid itself, as well as implementing charging infrastructure themselves for both the general public to be able to utilize as well as their own fleet. To give a brief snapshot of where EVs are in North Texas, we're going to go over some numbers so you guys can get a better idea of how many EVs and where EVs are in our region. Firstly, the reason why the air quality team is under the Transportation Department, the majority of the air quality issues that we have within North Texas are related to our ozone non-attainment, which means that we do not meet our ozone standard that is set by the EPA. Ozone itself is produced through nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds, which are predominantly released from the transportation sector. And so we are focusing a lot of our work to try to reduce transportation-related emissions to try to help further reduce our ozone levels over time and hopefully meet that EPA standard. Because EVs don't have emissions, we believe that higher EV adoption can help possibly help create that trend on a downward slope continuing. Across Texas, we do encompass electric vehicles as one of three categories. A fuel cell electric vehicle is considered a hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle. There's not too many of those across Texas today. However, that is going to become an increasingly more common technology that we may see entering the state in the next couple of years. Plug-in hybrid electric vehicles are an electric vehicle with a smaller battery as well as a backup gasoline engine. So when that battery is depleted, it does run on that gasoline engine. Approximately 27% of our electric vehicles within the state are plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And then finally, the battery electric vehicle, which is what everyone thinks of a pure EV, is 73% of the registered EVs in our state. It does not have any backup engine or anything like that. Once that battery depletes, it must charge up. And overall in the state, all three of these categories together are around 50,000 EVs. In North Texas, we have approximately 18,000 of those EVs. Over the past few years, we have seen a significant growth trend within our EVs and how many registered EVs we're seeing pop up in our region. Over the last 5 years, our average annual growth rate of EVs has been around 32%. And you could see that line chart on the right shows that ever increasing spike of registration. You see a small dip on the right-hand side that is encompassing the 2020 EV registration dip that we noticed throughout not only just electric vehicles, but vehicle registration in general had a small dip of 2020, but their 2021 numbers have vastly increased as well to continue us on that upward trend. We do a lot of this data in-house and gather the EV registration through the DMV and query this out to get these numbers. We do allow it to be publicly accessible, and you can reach those different tools on our electric vehicle North Texas website, which it can be located at dfwcleancities.org/EVNT. We understand today that there's not that many EVs, 18,000 EVs out of the almost 7 million people that we have within our region is not that significant of a industry marker. However, we are anticipating that EVs are to become an ever increasing portion of the vehicles that we're seeing on the road. The Biden administration just put out a goal to have over 500,000 electric vehicle chargers by the year 2030. And over the country, we only have approximately 44,000. So in less than 10-year period, they are going to increase that up to 500,000. And that is in preparation for the influx of EVs that they're expecting on the road. You could see this is showcasing, this graph here is showcasing the different projections that people have placed in regards to where they think the U.S. fleet will be at. Right now, we were at approximately 0.2% of EVs across the U.S. in 2018. By 2040, people are expecting us to be around 35% electric vehicles on the road. The auto industry is reacting to this very, very closely as well. This is a global shift, not just a U.S. shift, so we are following a lot of global trends. These are some of the bigger auto industry names, auto industry manufacturers, and showing what different goals and how much investment they have already put towards electrifying their fleet options and everything like that. So as you see right now, there's a limited portion of the vehicles on the market that you can purchase that's electric. That is quickly going to change by 2030, 2035. There will be many, many, many EVs available to purchase at different price points. When you talk about electric vehicles as well, you have to think about the charging infrastructure that you're thinking of. There are different levels of charging that people equate to electric vehicles. And so with this graph, you have level 1 that runs on kind of that 120 volt, very slow trickle charge. You get approximately 2 to 5 miles of range per hour. They are very cheap. That's basically what you can get without upgrading any electric capacity, just in a normal house plug. Level 2 are the majority of what you see in the publicly available chargers. They're slightly faster. You get approximately 10 to 20 miles of charge. They're slightly more expensive. It runs on that 208 to 240 volt charge. And then finally, it's the DC fast charge, which is the fastest base of charge. You can see it gets 180 to 240 miles. But with that fast charge does come with that cost. And so it is strategic on where and how many DC fast charge that you do see. It's more for people that need a quick charge on the go, such as interstates, things like that. You can see here, this is the charging hierarchy pyramid. The smaller tip of the pyramid means you need lesser of those stations and charging infrastructure there. And the bigger part of the pyramid at the base means the quantity you'll need to be able to continue to charge fleets as they grow. And so home and workplace are by far the largest because you're there the longest period of time. So maintaining infrastructure at those different areas and making sure people, when they have their car parked for a long period of time, are able to continuously charge, that's where you need the majority of those stations. Based on where your location type is and average time spent there, the different charging levels may be suited better than others. And so let's say you're staying at a travel stop really quickly, less than 20 minutes, one of those slow trickle level 1 charges will have minimal benefits. We are at the very last tail end of some funding that we have available, but this is just focused on level 2 chargers. The Texas Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Program had money available for the last year. Its application deadline is September 9th of this year, and you have approximately 24 months to actually complete the project once you submit your application. This covers funding up to $2,500 per charger, and if you're private, you can combine with the federal tax credit of an additional 30% if installed by the end of this year. This specific grant focused on workplaces, multifamily properties, as well as public sites. Over 1,700 sites were requested across the state as of the last date that we had accessibility to this data. And so once this funding is up, this funding will not come back. And so we are hoping that the majority of people that are interested in any stations or interested in any sites will take advantage of this as soon as possible to try to get that $2,500 in your pocket. Why utilities are and should be very involved with EVs right now? They have a large role within the EV industry. They have an essential role in enabling and connecting EVs. They can help speed its development. They can inform siting of different charging infrastructure to help keep costs low and ensure adequate grid capacity. That basically means you don't want, as a utility, to have someone come up and say, hey, I'm going to install 50 of those DC fast charging stations all within one small parking lot, and I want to do it tomorrow. That is just not capable with the amount of power it needs. And so working to try to inform the best siting to basically create the most consistent and stable siting and placement, not only for the grid itself, but for the customer. They can help support development and capacity in areas that might otherwise be overlooked or underserved, such as lower income, making sure these lower income communities that don't have the electric vehicle investment right now, because it is focused on those higher income Teslas, things like that. They are kind of distributed and densely distributed within these higher income areas, making sure that these lower income areas have the charge capacity and have the ability to also get electric vehicles as they become more prevalent. EVs themselves can have a substantial source of system benefit. They have with the right mix of different policies that can be set early and programs that reflect the market structure, supply mix, load dynamics, social goals, and other characteristics in a jurisdiction. Setting that now and figuring out where your role will be before you become a reactive change because so many EVs are on the road, it's very important now to ensure that success within your utility's role. Why should electric utilities and customers care about EVs? There's many different benefits. However, grid optimization is one of those top benefits. EV charging during off-peak hours can help fill nighttime load valleys and increase system load factors, creating better load management and create a more efficient grid. This can also help lower distribution costs in case. Resiliency and system reliability. Certain EVs that are coming on the market may be able to function as distributed storage resources, like backup power, and power the grid for emergency response. Thinking back to winter storm this year, this would have been an extremely valuable use with all these mobile battery systems with electric vehicles and being able to place for certain areas that didn't have power and they needed to supply heat or emergency power in the system that didn't have any backup generation. Vehicle to grid integration and other solutions can also help benefit as more vehicles become vehicle to grid capable. This basically means when vehicle to grid capacity is there and the charger itself has bidirectional capacity, you can take a car, plug it in to the charger, and the charger can actually pull the power from the vehicle and put it back onto the grid to stabilize some of those peak loads. Right now, Nissan vehicles have vehicle to grid capacity. However, Mitsubishi and Volkswagen have also made vehicle to grid announcements, and we are expecting it to become an ever increasingly common attribute within these new batteries that are coming on the market. Finally, it can, in certain instances, result in additional utility revenue. A well-managed EV charging may desirable new electricity demand, which can increase utility revenue and profits where applicable. And so it's not just about grid optimization. It's not just about you guys making more money because the utility itself is getting more people charging. It's a system that is a very well-oiled machine if done correctly, which is why we want to start having these conversations done today.
There are some challenges for utilities when thinking about increased EV penetration. High EV penetration could pose a lot of challenges for systems that aren't prepared for it. Like I mentioned within our EV registration data, right now, the amount of EVs that we are dealing with is very nominal. It's less than 1% of all vehicles. But if that changes to that 50%, like some projections are saying, that's a huge, huge dynamic change of how the industry and how much people need power for. If utilities respond to increased EV loads late and reactively, rather than trying to proactively plan out how it could impact and how they could try to manage the load. It could shorten the life of certain grid infrastructure components. It could require greater investments in peak and flexible capacity. It could make the grid less efficient. It may increase unit cost of electricity for all customers just because everything is very reactive. It could increase grid power emissions because of that reactivity. And then it could also make the grid less stable and reliable for some of the days that are going to be higher stress anyways. And so getting these conversations in, trying to plan out those scenarios for this possible load increase is very important because it does have larger implications. So some options that people have discussed where utilities can get involved in with electric vehicles. This slide is going over more of utility programmatic or internal options. And so within that, basically, the utility can do something on their own, doesn't have any customer facing impacts, but you can install EVSE installations across your jurisdiction. You can invest in those stations yourself within your operating area. You could help with education and outreach. This is an easy thing without costing anything. You could share information or host events to educate your customers and the public about EVs and EVSE. Fleet investments and demonstrations. It is basically how your vehicles can transition to electric. If you don't know, that can be like the larger, medium, heavy duty vehicles, as well as kind of your non-revenue, smaller light duty vehicles that are running around. But if you don't know what type of vehicle you want, or it's a big investment because electric vehicles do have a higher upfront cost and lower lifetime cost, but higher upfront cost, which could scare away some procurement staff. But there are demonstration programs such as the DFW Clean Cities Try and Drive Alternative, which we manage in-house. It basically allows you to test the technology fully before committing. And so you can try out a different vehicle that interests you with a certain alternative fuel, and then test that for a certain amount of days, certain amount of weeks, and then figure out, you know what, we do like this. It works for the needs that we need it for. Let's move forward with it, knowing and more confidently putting that investment forward. And then finally, workplace charging. Basically, you put stations, EVSE stations on your facility sites, and it can offer and promote charging for your employees and customers visiting your facility. Some North Texas examples of some of these utility programmatic options. Encore, they have a Drive Electric Be the Change campaign. You can see that on their website. They have a wrapped little Nissan Leaf car that they bring to different events with their logo on it, as well as a clear electric message. They have started some vehicles fleet transitioning over to electric. They also participate in getting some EV data loggers with our electric vehicle data collection project that we are a data partner on from a national perspective. And they also have chargers outside of their headquarters in Dallas. And so 3 really great things. And then CoServe, they have an EV education component at their annual meeting that they've had before, as well as on their website have a customer EV choice tool where people can basically go through and figure out using different drop downs, figure out what type of EV is best suited for them. And then Pentex Energy as well, from that survey results, stated that they are currently built in on an EV infrastructure network. And then if you know any other utilities that do have programmatic options that they are pursuing right now that is not on this list, definitely let us know. We would love to keep a running tab of what people are doing. And so if you don't see yourself here, or you know someone else is doing something else, definitely let us know. Some consumer-facing options that people, this is probably more of the common utility-based programs that you hear about in conversations, but the customer-facing options. Many utilities across the country offer EVSE incentives. Basically, they provide financial and or technical support for customers to install EVSE at their homes or residents or businesses. And then the utility would provide a financial incentive for that. There's also an electric vehicle incentive. So basically the utility would provide financial support, a rebate, something, bill credit for customers who purchase or lease electric vehicles. And then there's a rate design effort. And so basically you can design a whole house or EV only time of use rate, a bill credit, or other rate-based programs that essentially give the electric vehicle, when it's charging, an entire different rate. So it incentivizes the person to move forward with buying their electric. And then there's advanced metering infrastructure, the AMI. And so that will offer incentives to customers who allow the installation of a meter that evaluates charging station usage and charging behaviors, or controls EV charging during peak demand, which is probably the most important part of that. Basically, you can turn off the charging of the vehicle. If the vehicle is there all day being charged, it doesn't need to be charging that entire time. If there's a peak demand issue, you can turn the charging off for the vehicle to kind of control the load. And then once that load kind of levels out and that demand levels out, you can start charging that vehicle again. So North Texas examples and some customer-facing options. United Cooperative Services offers rebates of 50% up to $500 of the installation cost for level 2 residential chargers. And then Denton Municipal Electric offers a Green Sense incentive program, which equates to $300 rebate for the purchase of an electric vehicle or plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. And so that was just basically a very brief background discussion, so people can all be on the same page and kind of gauge what and how we wanted to start this discussion. But before we start the open discussion, we do have a few people that are going to give some highlights of what they've done and their existing efforts. And so our first speaker on highlight will be Clayton Stice from ERCOT. He has a few slides he's going to go over. And so Clayton, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. My name is Clayton Stice. I'm with ERCOT. I'm the emerging principal engineer in emerging technologies. So I keep track of a lot of new things on the distribution system that ERCOT otherwise doesn't really get involved with that much. But things like, as from you had in your previous slide, how are utilities preparing in terms of supplying all of this? You have Encore on. So in terms of providing the local connections for electric vehicle charging and things like that, Encore, of course, would be your contact for those guys and the other distribution providers that are also on this call, such as CoServe and Tri-Cities and SWEPCO. But in the ERCOT area, we would be responsible for the transmission that would be able to carry the power around the state that would support this additional load. So what we do is every 2 years, if you go to the next slide, please. Every 2 years, ERCOT does what we call an LTSA. And what we do, the purpose of this is to look at 15 years in the future and through various scenarios to understand what the potential impacts would be. This happens in if you go to the ERCOT website, a lot of stakeholders are involved, and it's an alphabet soup of the different groups that look at this stuff. The LTSA is done in a regional planning group where we do the long-term planning. We do a bunch of different scenarios. Here's a link to the one that was released in 2020. We have current trends, emerging technologies. In other words, what do you do if there's a very accelerated adoption of a lot of these technologies? There's a variety of, high oil price, high natural gas price. There are things that affect long-term how the fuel mix for the generation fleet in ERCOT would respond. So it's a very complicated look ahead into the future. If you go to the next slide. Of course, one of the things that we always look at is what the base EV assumptions will be. This is kind of a busy chart, and I apologize, but it was originally intended to show people familiar with the LTSA what the difference was going to be between the 2022, which we expect to release at the end of next year, and what was released last year in the 2020 LTSA. Again, as I said, these are very complicated scenarios, so we start actually working on them the minute the previous one is released. So in 2020, the reference for our base EV growth was the 2018 BNEF. And the output from it was essentially 3 million cars, 600,000 light duty trucks, pickup trucks. And we didn't really have any kind of assumption for buses, short haul trucks, or long haul trucks in the base EV. In the emerging technologies, we had made some assumptions, but in the base, there wasn't really any good data. The other thing was in the 2020, we kind of had everything, as you see in line item number 3, we had buses and short haul trucks grouped together. So for this year, we are looking at these 4 different primary categories across the top. The light duty vehicles, which includes both cars and pickup trucks, percent miles driven by buses. I'll get into what we mean by percent of miles. Percent of miles driven by short haul trucks, and percent of miles driven by long haul heavy duty trucks. Also for 2022, you'll notice that the number of light duty vehicles basically stays the same. In other words, that's a projection in 15 years into the future, that in 2037, we expect there to be, the assumption is that there would be 3.6 million light duty vehicles, which also actually matches, coincidentally, the 2020 LTSA base assumption. The reason is that there's, we just haven't seen the number of vehicles in ERCOT sold match what the BNEF curve is. We're not discounting the BNEF curve. We just feel that a lot of the growth is happening in other states like California and New York. So what we've done essentially is just time shifted the curve to match the actual sales volumes that have been reported throughout ERCOT for the last several years. And so what that does is it reduces the number of electric vehicles in the future slightly based on that. And again, with the resurgence of COVID again, I think the expectation is that we have a couple of years where growth isn't happening as to what people's expectations were, a couple of years ago. So if you look at, so that's what I've covered 1 and 2. One. So what we've done also in the base EV assumptions is that car sales started, with the Leaf and Tesla vehicles, several years ago, at least 10 years ago for the Leaf. But there haven't been any electric pickup trucks yet, really, in any volume. So we factor in different adoption rates for cars versus pickup trucks. And if everyone's aware of in Texas, there's almost a third of the vehicles sold are pickup trucks and 2/3 are passenger vehicles. So that has an impact. So one of the things that also happens is that we can look at all of the TxDOT and TEA data for number of miles driven daily or annually in ERCOT. And then as we get a number of EV buses and trucks sold, we can factor out a percentage of actual miles driven. With electric cars, we can kind of make that assumption, but a lot of the forecasts like BNEF that we base our assumptions on are on actual car sales. However, since we don't have actually good numbers, for example, long haul heavy duty trucks is especially complicated because not many of them are they're interstate. There are not many actually registered in the state of Texas that would represent the actual highway miles driven in the state. Again, most of those are going interstate. But we do know how many miles are driven by these trucks based on TxDOT data. So we can make an assumption that if you have this fraction of the trucks that are EV, that they would account for this percent of miles that were driven in the state. So that's how we get the percent miles driven by buses, short haul trucks, and long haul heavy duty trucks. If you go to the next slide. So on the left is the curves in terms of vehicle adoption, percent of sales, and percent on the road. And on the right-hand side, we've gotten charging profiles from NREL. And again, this is primarily based on existing data. So these charging profiles may vary in the future, but they're at least reference charging profiles that we have. So given that we know how many cars there are, how many miles per day they're driving, and essentially the quote gas mileage, unquote, electric mileage, how many kilowatts it takes to go a mile, we can calculate the actual hourly load that would be added on to the ERCOT transmission system throughout the state on a daily basis or on an hourly basis by day. Now, if you look at the buses, even on the previous chart, you saw buses having a very, very high penetration, school buses, city buses by 2037. They don't actually represent, since there aren't that many of them compared to cars and trucks, and they have pretty much fixed routes. The total amount of electric load resulting is actually not that great because they don't actually drive that many miles in a day. School buses don't typically drive that many miles on average in a day. Neither do city buses. They do their loops, but each individual bus doesn't actually record that many miles. And as you can see, the big impact is light duty vehicles, followed by local heavy duty trucks and long haul heavy duty trucks. So that's what ERCOT is taking into our base assumption for what the additional electrical load will be in 2037. And we'll factor that in with all of the other things in terms of how this could impact our generation and transmission needs in the future. So in terms of sales data, again, what we are using is percent sales. The references that we use for our base assumptions are like BNEF. There's for a lot of light duty vehicles. For heavy duty vehicles, some of them are based on BNEF, some of them are based on other studies that we've seen. Again, there's not much out there in terms of heavy duty vehicle sales projections. Heavy duty vehicles have existed for several years. Actually, up in North Texas, Peterbilt has a factory up in Denton where they produce EV heavy duty trucks. I saw a question earlier about what about heavy duty trucks? Are they, New York City has received, I believe, 70 heavy duty garbage trucks. They're using those. So there are niche applications where we expect pretty good heavy duty vehicle penetration in the next few years. Again, as you can see, long haul heavy duty trucks, because of the size and cost of the battery, are not actually from growth projections we have seen, like BNEF, do not actually have that much in terms of sales. The local heavy duty trucks like garbage trucks and delivery vehicles, fleet vehicles, is where the sales are going to pay off soonest. So that's where we see the sales being the fastest. At this point, I'll stop. Are there any questions?
Yeah, we could take a few minutes here if anyone has any questions for Clayton on any of the stuff that he just presented. You can feel free to just unmute yourself or turn on your camera.
Hey Clayton, this is Lori Clark over at the North Central Texas COG. I was curious where y'all get your sales data.
Well, we know actually, oh, you mean in terms of actual sales?
Yes.
We have gotten the data from EPRI.
Okay, great, thank you.
They do a report where they cull through all of the registration and give us accurate numbers of EV sales. So that's where we've been getting our data from. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Is that a publicly available report, and is there a cost for it?
It's not publicly available, and members have to pay to get copies of it. I think IHS Market also does it too.
Yeah. If nobody,
and we're a member of the P18 heavy duty trucks effort, because that's an area where there, like I said, there's not a lot of data available out there. So we're trying to participate in some of the early learnings on some of those things.
Got it. So this may be a loaded question. Load. Sorry for the intended pun there. But on this graph where you're showing the hourly charging load that you're projecting in 2037, how are y'all feeling about that? Are you feeling like the generation capacity is adequate to keep up based on what's in the interconnect queue and what you expect to come online? Or are you, when you look at these curves, do you start to get nervous at all? I think there's a lot of people who have questions about that.
Well, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, right? This is looking out, 15 years in the future. So what this does is it helps inform the marketplace that is our base assumption in 2037 that additional load will need to be served. In terms of our own look ahead, I mean, if you look at the ERCOT website, we really only have visibility a couple of years in advance in terms of the amount of generation that's coming on our system. So we would have no idea what type of generation we would be getting in 2037. We can see a couple of years in the future. And again, the bulk of it, if you all have noticed, right now there's an expectation that we're going to have somewhere around 20 gigawatts of solar by 2024. That's a number no one would have thought possible a couple of years ago. We're over 31 gigawatts of wind already. So the generation, and again, this chart reflects is the availability of power at night for people doing home charging. And the current studies show that there's about 85% of the passenger vehicles do home charging, and 15-ish% do either workplace or other charging during the daytime. So you can see there's some charging during the day, but the bulk of it happens overnight. And obviously in ERCOT, with that much wind, there's a lot of power availability and low prices in overnight time periods. Did that answer your question?
Clayton, this is
For
Ben.
now. Thanks.
I've got a question for you that is probably similar, but maybe more complicated. Do you see this driving more CREZ style multi-value transmission projects or anything like that?
No, but when we do our transmission studies with loads, that's where we're going to start. When you get closer each year, when we do the transmission studies and see the constraints, that's when we're going to start seeing this. This is not something that's going to spring up on us overnight. This is something, as you can see, that's going to occur over a period of 15 years. So, ERCOT builds transmission to serve load, and as load increases, we would expect the transmission system to be expanded to accommodate that. And that's where the local wires companies like Encore, that's their part to play, is they're the ones that see that the load is increasing locally to serve that additional load on the system. And that's where they would need to increase their capacity first, and then the transmission system would follow afterwards. Now you realize one of the things that ERCOT has that's a huge advantage over many of the other states is that almost everyone has air conditioning at their house. So the electrical service to individual houses in ERCOT is usually sized much higher than electrical services, for houses in the Northeast or Northwest where you don't have as much air conditioning. So if you do, as you see on this charging, as you do your charging at night, you're not overloading your local system as much because it's already sized for handling the peak daytime air conditioning load. So there's some benefits and advantages that ERCOT has that some of the other states don't when it comes to EV adoption, but that's more of a distribution level issue. And this, maybe the Encore people could speak to that in their presentation. But hopefully we have, between the TDSPs like Encore and ERCOT, I think we're working to make sure that there aren't any issues in the future in terms of being able to support this additional load.
For sure. Well, thank you for building in that segue, because our next speaker, Tom Anthony from Encore, can speak to some of what Encore's perspective on the electric vehicle growth is happening. So I'll just pop back up to this one. So Tom, if you want to start talking, that'd be great.
Thanks so much.
You bet. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, Tom, we can.
Okay. I apologize, I don't have any slides, but since Clayton's thrown me under the bus so many times already, I guess I'll have to make up some stuff. But what I was asked to do and what I'm going to try to do is kind of give a little history of why Encore is where it is and what we're doing now and what we can do, because since we are a delivery company, we're the largest delivery company in Texas, 3.7 million customers. Or 3.7 million meters, we would consider it. And we cover a good geographical area of the state because we got the middle of Odessa, go over past Tyler, and go down to the Austin area. We have a lot of opportunities that EVs are going to present to us. But let me start with the past. Clayton mentioned EPRI, and for those of you who don't know, that's the Electric Power Research Institute. We started out back in, I would say, about 2009, joining an EPRI a working group. It was called the EV Transportation Infrastructure Group. And the one reason we joined at that time, we did not know how quickly that people were going to assume that electric vehicles took off, but we wanted to see what the impact would be on our system. So that is why we were joined that one group. EPRI had other transportation groups, but that's the only one we joined and participated in. And then once we finally figured it would be a slow process, probably like when people got central air conditioner in the 60s, it would be a slow process to impact our system. We dropped from the group, but we still kind of have some feelers in there. We know folks down in Centerpoint who still participate, and we can get information from them on a pretty regular basis. But so what we did, we joined for the purpose of our infrastructure. How was that going to be impacted? We also did an in-house study with our planning group that modeled various scenarios of circuits. And from that, we determined that it might be when we got to, it depended on the circuit, but when it got to maybe a 30% penetration level of electric vehicles, we would have to start doing some upgrades. Now, the issue with an electric vehicle is when you put one in a household, and if your neighbors see it, they might think that's neat. So they might go and get one too. So we had the problem of clustering where you had several EVs on one transformer, and that can create an issue. But we did a study early on, and we found out that less than 2% of electric vehicles actually overloaded a transformer. But that was, once again, that was years ago. That was in about 2010. And so we realized that it was not near the issue at that time, or it was going to be a slow growth issue that we figured out was going to occur. So early on, about 2010, 2011 timeframe, we went out ourselves and purchased 6 Nissan Leafs. And at that time, the Leaf got 70 miles on a charge. And we purchased 6 Chevy Volts, Volt with a V. And that was the hybrid that got about 40 miles on electric, and then it shifted pretty seamlessly. It was an impressive car to drive, shifted seamlessly to a gas generation that drove the electricity after that. So we got those. We installed charging equipment. Bailey alluded to at our main headquarters in downtown Dallas, which is kind of like catty corner from the H. Ross Perot museum facility down there. We got we installed some there. We installed some in our parking garage there. We installed some at some of our facilities, some of our service centers around. For example, we sent one of the Volts out to Midland, Odessa. And so obviously they needed a way to charge there because no one knew anything about charging at that time. So we have probably about 24 charging devices right now. And, but they're all for internal use. Even though I will say the people that went to the H. Ross Perot quickly figured out, because the ones there are kind of open, they quickly figured out they could waive their charge point card and they could get a free charge. So we did realize that went on with, but for the most part, they're behind a gate and people could not have access to them. So they were for employee vehicles only, and these few sedans that we had procured. Now, since that time, in the 2016, 2017 timeframe, we have added a couple of Chevy Bolts. We've added some Ford, what is the hybrid? Ford Escapes, that's it. And we've also put in a few diesel bucket trucks, but it's a diesel drive. The lift part, the lift part of the bucket is all electric. And this is real handy when you go into a neighborhood and you don't have to keep your vehicle idling because the electric's driving the lift up and the lift down. And so it just it leads to a quieter environment. And obviously it leads to a cleaner environment because you're not blowing that diesel out at the time. So that is what we've done over the years, but we realized that maybe this is going to come a little faster than we thought. And so we have developed what Encore mostly does is we educate, because as people have said, we don't sell electric vehicles. We don't sell electric vehicle chargers. We don't own the energy that is sold from a charger. We do deliver it, so there is some value to Encore for that. We get paid for the delivery fee, but we don't own the energy. So what we basically wanted to do was get people aware that these were coming. Please don't be scared of them. We had a really nice looking booth that we set up at EarthX events, at some auto shows. We did a Fort Worth auto show and a Dallas auto show. And if y'all have been to those, it was 2018, 2019, we set up booths that we could demonstrate how to charge. We had an electric vehicle there. We had one of our Bolts or one of our Leafs there. We have since, like I said, we've since bought some new 150-mile Leafs also. So we have them wrapped in green and blue colors, and we have set those up, and we show people how to charge. You grab a kid at a car show, you bring him over, his parents are going to follow, wondering what this person is doing, grabbing their child, and you put a charger in his hand, you say, "Here, look, put it in right there." little light comes on, and lo and behold, the kid now knows how to charge, and the parents hopefully are impressed with that also. But we feel it's important to educate the public that this is not something to be scared of. And so that is one reason that we went pretty much all out and set up a really good looking booth. If y'all, I don't know if y'all have seen it or not, but so we did all that. So if there are any issues or any questions that you have for Encore, you can go to encore.com/EV, and that will take you to a website that we have many categories of, from models to cost modeling to plan a trip out and here where your stations are, your charging stations, from Dallas to Houston, or we actually drove a Bolt to a Texas Municipal League event in San Antonio, and we took our Fort Worth Bolt, and drove it down there, and we used the Round Rock Electrify America facility to get down there. Now, I got to admit, on the way, a norther had blown through. This was in October, and we had a north wind blowing against us, and so we had to stop twice to charge on the way back. But it was, even though it being a little bit longer trip, it was an adventure to be able to take this electric vehicle where we took it. So that being the case, and pardon me, I'm still old fashioned. I still have an old landline that I thought I'd disconnected, but obviously I haven't. So that being the case, in last year, during 2020, we went out and got a consultant, because we feel the real big impact on Encore is going to be fleets, because the Encore service area has over 21,000 fleets. Now, that might be as big as JB Hunt to as small as McShann Florist. So if an air conditioning company has 3 or 4 vehicles, we consider that a fleet. But we have overall 21,000. And if you look as you're landing at DFW, for those of you who have flown since this pandemic has hit, you'll just see warehouse after warehouse after warehouse out there. So we commissioned this person, or this group, this consultant, to determine what the impact on Encore could be from fleet electrification within the next decade. Well, they had various scenarios they ran, but one thing that we found out is if every fleet vehicle, and then we're talking fleet now, we're not talking residential, if every fleet vehicle in Encore were to electrify, the energy would have been about 112 terawatt hours. Now that's terawatts. Yeah, you'll have to go and look and see how many zeros that is behind a kilowatt. But Encore on a normal year does 152 terawatt hours. So you're saying you would be adding 40% energy to what we do right now. If every fleet were to electrify, your demand would go up from 36 gigawatts, which is our approximate demand, and you would the fleet amount would be 31 gigawatts above that. So you see that there are the potential with fleets for some major planning that we're going to have to do. And I've talked on some of these before, and the one thing I've asked people to do is to contact Encore, talk with our new customer management group. I even have a name that I will give y'all, so that we can get ahead of this game, because there are going to be some locations that come out. I was on a webinar where UPS was talking about their electrification yesterday, and they said that it's coming starting 2023. Some of them will be 18-wheelers. I think that they mentioned, as Clayton alluded to, Peterbilt might be one of their sources. Plus, being down in Texas, we're eventually going to have that Tesla semi that comes out of Austin. So we build a lot here. 13% of freight traffic in the country comes through Dallas-Fort Worth, through the various interstates, the 35 and the 45, the 20 and the 30. And we have so many warehouses here that with 22,000 fleets, that we realize that if someone were to come to us and say, we have 10 semis that we need to start charging and we need power tomorrow, we could not do it. We need y'all to be ahead of that game. We need y'all. Well, no, it's not y'all. I'm preaching to the choir here, I realize. But the one thing we tell customers, we need them to contact our group so we can get we have a tool that we built called a Green Fleet tool that will help us get folks load put down on a piece of paper and get it over to our planning group to plan. We're gonna have to buy land. There's some places we're probably gonna have to put new substations in because our substations are already overloaded. We're gonna have to get land. We're gonna have to do right of way. And we think it's coming at it'll be gradual, but it's still in a 20-year basis. We think there's gonna be just thousands of if not tens to hundreds of thousands of these vehicles out there. And so we need to be aware of what we can do to get out ahead of that game. And so I want to leave this name with y'all. If there are any questions that you have about fleet, the name that I have for y'all is Scott Bombach, and he spoke on one of these earlier, and he's Scott.BAUMBACK@Oncor.com. So if there's any questions you have about fleets coming in, or really any kind of thing, even on a residence, then that Scott is in our new construction management group, and he would be able to assist you on that. So once again, Scott.Bombach, BAUMBACK@Oncor.com. And that is pretty much what I've got for now until the open discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Ben,
I see Ben popped his face up. So
yep.
Tom, I was just curious. Somebody forwarded me something the other day that you guys are going to start offering a rebate for residential batteries. And I was curious if that had anything to do with the impact of EVs on the residential level and trying to balance any of that out kind of at the edge of the distribution system.
Well, what I am aware of is that we used to offer solar incentives. And on the residential area, we have backed off of that some. It was so well taken, but now we want to pair those with batteries. So I believe that's the reason for the battery offering that is coming out now. We have an energy efficiency group that is kind of like cutting our own legs out, but we offer incentives for people to use less energy. But at the same time, the same way that Bailey mentioned in her presentation, with charging and everything, we're going to try to have to manage load and shift the charging to probably different time frames, maybe deep nights. And so that's going to have to be done. Can we meet? I'm seeing right here. So can we meet the current and near demand for immediate EV growth? I think we can for immediate. Is with what we're going to have to get people to help us with is the long-term planning. When the fleets come along, how quickly. One thing that was positive about the UPS presentation yesterday, they say it's going to be a gradual, but they did say Texas will be. California obviously is the first stop, but they say Texas will be on the map also. And like I say, they're talking about getting semis in 2023 and 2024. So, but even that will be gradual. So yes, I think that.
So Tom, in regards to that planning perspective, just for other people's benefit, how long in advance or how far in advance do you guys ask people to think and basically plan ahead for potential new stations, potential new load in certain areas, from best case scenario for you guys? Is it a 5 year? Is it a 10-year? What do you guys need in order to get that prepared?
What we need is, we need 6 months for a single vehicle. And then I think, as a comrade, Eric Daniel, who used to be in charge of this, said at one time, we need 1 additional month for every megawatt that's added to that. So what we need to do, as I said, is when you get them all in and say, I need it now, that doesn't work. But let us know as quickly as you know, and what size vehicles you're going to get, and what size charging you're going to use, and what the growth rate is going to be. In other words, you anticipate you'll have 10 Class 6 vans next year, and then maybe 2 semis the following year. That is all the information we need. But they have a form that they can give to you and give to your electrician and your contractor, and that will be what is needed to do. And I'm going to make a correction here. It is the first, and I probably said it wrong. The first iteration there is correct as far as Scott Bombeck's email address. Of course, he doesn't know I'm on here, so yeah, I might be getting a call from him later today. But so yeah, that is.
And we'll send out all the information.
It's not the K, and I think when I spelled it out the second time, I probably did put a K in there.
Yeah, and if any other utility on the line has a point of contact that you guys have, similar to Scott, that you want to put in the chat, we're eager to have that list. So while we're getting calls and different inquiries in, we can share that information with all those people to make sure that they are coordinating with the utility as soon as possible. But I have one follow-up question with you, Tom. So in regards to that heavy duty vehicles, there's obviously bigger batteries, the long haul trucks, things like that. How are you guys planning in the more ruralized kind of interstate exchanges, more rural Texas highways, how to coordinate the power capacity there that's not there? That's going to need to, basically in the future, with those long haul trucks that need to charge that. How are you guys planning that out?
You know what, we haven't really gotten to that extent of planning that. If it is a big facility out in a rural area and they're going to have several semis out there, we're going to have to build capacity out there. There's no two ways about it. That might require substations. That might just be required upgrading the wiring out of an existing substation that serves that facility. The issues that we have right now is the fleets we have, the warehouses is really all the load they have right now. So you might go from 170 kilowatt load to all of a sudden you need 20 megawatts because you're bringing all these semis in. So we're going to have to build to it one way or another. One thing I will say, on the UPS thing yesterday, some of them were talking about putting in their own microgrids, and for them providing their own power. That's what we have seen in the oil fields in West Texas when we can't meet their schedules, because they will say, I need to be here, I need power now. And we say, it's going to take us a while to get out there because we have to build transmission lines out to you. And so it might be some of them that do power on their own. There are some facilities, and I don't know, I just know level 2 chargers where you have its own solar system and its own battery. And therefore that is a way to get around not needing grid power immediately. So some of it might be they provide their own power, but if it's grid power, then we will do what we have to do to get it out there. Even on those situations, we're going to need planning because we're still going to have to potentially procure right of way and maybe buy land.
For sure. So I see Lori's on. Sorry, Clayton? You can go ahead, Clayton.
I was just going to make an observation I think Tom is aware of. The current high-powered charger infrastructure that's being experimented with is at Oak Ridge National Labs. For charging semis, it's a 3 megawatt charger for a single charger. So this kind of represents both Tom's and ERCOT's issue when you're starting to talk about that type of power level.
Interesting.
So you bring in 10 semis that all need to charge quickly at 3 gigawatts each. You're talking about a new station right there.
Mm-hmm. So with we only have about 15 minutes left and 2 more presenters. So Laura, if you have another question right now for Tom, you can drop it. Okay, so Justin, you have your you're the next person to speak. So if you want to add your question or just combine it into kind of a brief overview, if you can keep it to maybe 5 minutes just to keep the timing aligned. But
I apologize.
Oh no, Tom, it was great. Like obviously it's better to, that was great information. An hour and a half goes by really fast though.
Right.
And so Justin is from Bandera Electric Cooperative. And so from a co-op's perspective, they're outside San Antonio area. And so I'm going to give a brief overview from a co-op's perspective of kind of what they've done in their efforts from EV and energy efficiency.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group, and I really think the first 2 presentations are a great lead-in for how we as a distribution co-op are looking at power supply. And we're looking at a whole home. So we've seen rapid growth. We're seeing great meter growth annually. We're seeing density. We're seeing electric vehicles come in, but it's still a luxury item. So we're seeing it come in density where there's a luxury neighborhood and there might be 20 Teslas that live on the same street. That has an impact on our grid, and we need to be aware of that and stay ahead of it. What we've been able to do is install our Pollyware program. So for those of you that are in the utility side, ERCOT's interesting to see here. What we've been able to do is put load management devices through our Energy Saver program into these homes and start to collect the behavior, start to incentivize charging times, time of use rates, and look at gamifying how they are charging their EVs, when they're charging their EVs, and then where there's solar generation batteries, we have incentives for them to participate in our DA programs and how we reduce load at critical times. So Bandera Electric Cooperative really sits at the tip of the spear from how we work with our energy efficiency programs, and that's in the residents as well as commercial entities. Where we've seen EVs come into the conversation is in density. So we offer a $1,000 rebate on EV purchase, and we are a distributor of an EV charger that we'd love to talk to any of the co-ops or utilities about in the future, where we can put out level 2 chargers. We're also installing fast chargers in dense tourism areas. So we have a lot of traffic that comes out of Austin and San Antonio into the Hill Country. And so we're seeing these commuters come into our territory looking for places to charge. So we're facilitating a little bit different lifestyle usage than a dense city center, but we're still seeing rapid growth. We're seeing demand for it. So we've put out public charging stations throughout our territory. We're also on I-10. So we see the imminent move to heavy truck and then fleet vehicles as well. Working with Tesla and other providers, we're trying to ensure that we become the charging solution west of San Antonio before they go long haul across the rest of the state, or if they're coming in from West Texas, they're stopping in our territory to charge. So from a planning standpoint, we put all of this together. We want to ensure that we know who has an electric vehicle, and we do that through our rebate program. We want to offer them behind the meter services through our Energy Saver program so that we can have a Pollyware installed and they can start to see how they're using energy every day. A Pollyware gives them a 12% efficiency gain right out of the bat because they can look at real-time live streaming data on how they're consuming energy in their home at the sub-circuit level. So how is their EV performance? How is their air conditioner performance? And we're starting to get into predictive and comparative analytics to where we can say, hey, your air conditioner is running less efficient than it did last week. Have you changed your filter? When your EVs start coming in, hey, we can see you're charging more often. You're charging at the wrong times. You have solar. maybe you should consider charging at 2 o'clock in the afternoon versus 2 o'clock in the morning at a residential rate. So we're looking at the whole home and using fleet technology, and I appreciated the use of the word fleet. We're looking at our EV chargers as a fleet. So we have several hundred of them out in our territory. They're all monitored by ApolloWare. We know the behaviors of those EV chargers because we see that in our utility systems and ensure that we are prepared for it. We're updating the grid. I think to Tom's point, if we wait for the consumer to tell us what they need, we're going to be behind every time. So we're using our live data to ensure that we're planning when we're building new developments, we're planning for EV density, and then we're incentivizing those home builders to plan for EVs, offer it. If they want to say they have a smart home, let's give them a complete smart home solution that's going to drive energy efficiency. My final point, and just to make sure we have time, we provide solar. So we are a solar installer. We provide storage. We have Tesla Powerwall. We use Enphase and Generac. And then we're working with Yada as a pilot program for their commercial battery solution. What will be disruptive in our business is batteries coming online. Double that when there's a car that is now a rolling battery that's going to be plugging power back into the grid for an incentive. And it might be at home, it might be somewhere at work, we as grid operators need to anticipate what the power of batteries will do, because we saw in Uri, I will say batteries were parasitic. They were always charging at the highest rates. And from a member equity in the co-op world, there's a conversation to be had about how we're utilizing that. And I think EVs are going to push that conversation quickly, but distributed storage and distributed generation, those are your consumers that are really sophisticated. When you're a Tesla owner, you know all about batteries and all about solar, and you're in that conversation, you're talking about kilowatts and kilowatt hours, you know the difference. We need to meet that information future with transparency of data and a relationship that looks different than, oh, we're just going to send you a bill every month. So Bandera Electric's working real hard. We're excited. We have a solution that we've taken to market. We've taken it to several co-ops and several municipal utilities as well. And we'd be happy to talk about how we do our funding through RUS, how municipalities and co-ops could do energy efficiency programs in a similar fashion and gain full fleet control. Know how many air conditioners are running. What does that look like? What is that doing to your load? How many EV chargers are charging and when? What does that look to your infrastructure? And for our provider, LCRA, in most cases, that data is valuable and it helps us plan 10 to 15 years in the future.
Thanks, Justin. That's super, super interesting, especially the power of data to inform decisions is so important today. Does anyone have any quick questions for Justin? We can come back to questions in about 5 minutes. If anyone has a quick question right now, that's dire to drop in. Okay, so thank you, Justin. We will hopefully have a few minutes at the very end for people to ask more questions, but for the sake of time, we are going to jump to our last presenter, Daniel Richmond. He's going to give the perspective from Green Mountain Energy, so from a rep's perspective on what they've done. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bailey. I'll try to talk for about 5 minutes, leave questions for the end, and go through some of the initiatives that we've done at Green Mountain Energy around really all of this stuff. And we kind of tie together solar and EV as well into an initiative that we call Riding on Sunshine. The goal is to get people both driving electric vehicles powered by solar energy. So they run down a couple of responses to things that other people had said too, as well as some of my prepared talking points. Let me start with a couple that Bailey, you had sent to me yesterday. The first one is, do we offer incentive rates for EV charging? Short answer is yes. As a rep in the competitive space, we are constantly coming up with new charging structures, new rate structures, new ways to meet what our customers want in terms of their electric vehicle. Interesting ways to give them insights into their electric vehicle, and kind of doing a lot of stuff that, sorry, I can't remember the name of the guy that spoke just before me, that Justin mentioned about Bandera. So a couple of the quick ones that we have right now. we actually give free EV chargers to people who install solar and size that system to account for a future electric vehicle. So if you put very roughly 100% offset solar system plus 6 extra panels to account for the use of a future EV, we'll install that charger for you at the time of installation. A couple of people may have touched on it, but it's so much easier to do an EVSE, a charger installation, when you've already got an electrician out there, you're already opening everything up, rather than trying to do it as a standalone project where it's the only thing that's going on. A couple of the other things that we've got going on in terms of electric plans, we have a, starting with people who don't have EVs yet, we have a plan that includes carbon offsets to kind of get them started on that journey towards driving clean. A time of use plan specifically for people with EVs, lower rate at night compared to during the day. And as part of that plan, we actually do automatic EV charge scheduling for Tesla drivers. So we can connect to their EV and integrate that in with their electricity plan. And as soon as you plug your car in, it'll get a signal from us. I think it's every 30 minutes, stop charging, stop charging, stop charging. And then at 8 o'clock, we go start charging. And the car will only charge during that overnight period. You can overrule it, you can override it, but trying to make sure that people can integrate their EV into their electric plan as well. Last one on the plans, this is more solar for EV drivers who have solar panels. We do still offer one-to-one uncapped unlimited net metering. If you've heard of it or seen it, it's the Renewable Rewards electricity plan, but we've limited that to only people who install panels through us. So kind of tying those businesses together, but those plans are still available. Second one here was pricing strategies and insights, lessons learned. I think the funniest thing I've learned I've been doing EVs for 10 years now, is that EVs and solar customers are not a monolithic group. They don't have the same goals. I've had solar customers call me and say, hey, can you lower my electricity price? And then 5 minutes later, somebody calls and says, hey, can you raise my electricity price? Because they're selling more back to me. And it's like, same with EV drivers. We think we're going to get people who want to charge during the day to take advantage of their solar, people who want to charge at night to reduce grid or increase grid stability, reduce grid stress. So it's meeting kind of all those disparate needs of the different ways that people use their vehicles. Let's see, the last thing that we do as a rep to support EV adoption, lots of education out there. I don't think I really gave a background on myself. I've been working in EVs since 2011. I started out with EVgo, left them in 2015, and really talking to people about EVs, giving them that different perspective on how is this going to integrate into your life. The thing I'd love to do is just give people an EV for 3 months, 6 months, let them build that habit and get hooked on it. We're not offering that yet through Green Mountain, although I have loaned out my car a couple of times to people. But getting behind the wheel is the biggest way to drive that change, and really getting people into the habit and understanding it's going to take some time to get used to. The first couple times you drive it, you'll be looking for an EV charger everywhere you go. You'll be worried about your range. And after a couple of months, you'll get in and go, I'm good. I'll just plug it in when I get home. I drove, somebody had mentioned a 2011, 2012 Nissan Leaf that got about 70 miles of range. I had one of those for 4 years and charged at level 1. And in doing a bunch of calculations and going through that experience, if you have a level 1 charger, so if you have a garage, you have an outlet, and you're driving less than 75 miles a day, you can use a level 1 charger and always wake up with a full battery. Above that, you start to really need level 2. But that's a good rule of thumb for thinking about how far people are driving, especially during the pandemic. I actually had a level 2 charger installed with a longer range Leaf, a 225 mile. And it was like, where's the challenge? It's too easy now. I've got 225 miles of range, 6.6 kW charger. Like it's getting so easy that it's, that there's no challenge in it. So getting back to education that we do, using e-gallon prices, giving people the equivalent cost of gasoline. Quick rule of thumb, if you take your cost per kWh for electricity, multiply by about 9, you could use 10 to be conservative. That's the equivalent cost of gasoline. So 10-cent electricity is about $1 a gallon gas. I know lots of people would love to be paying $1 a gallon for gas. I've got one more page of stuff, and I think I can cover it in about 2 minutes. Vehicle to grid, we're working on that as well. Really waiting for J1772 standard to support that. Doing it with CHAdeMO equipment on the Leaf is just too expensive at the moment. If anybody on this call has any idea about residential programs, let me know. We're constantly looking at them. Wanted to go back through GME's history with EVs. GME first started doing an EV partnership in 2011 with EVgo. That one's no longer in place, but shows that we have been working on it for a long time, even when there were, 20, 30, 200 cars sold a month and not 100,000 or whatever we're at now. Let's see, went through the EV app interface, went through level 1. We are very focused on the residential consumer and their experience with us. That kind of speaks to our EV app interface. We're looking to expand that beyond just the one plan that's available now. And then I think somebody had a question. Let me pull it up real quick. Word on the street is that GME changed its buyback plan to cap the buyback. That is correct. That applies to almost everybody who didn't buy their panels from EV. Somebody else said, I think it was Justin said he installs panels. We do as well. We have an installation business. It's small. It's not a huge program, but we do give kind of the full suite of incentives to those people. So free EV charging, uncapped, unlimited net metering, uncapped, unlimited buyback. But it is very controlled to make sure that it's only offered to people who do buy the panels from us. And James, I think I can get you a reference to that since you asked the question about it. And hopefully
Thank you.
it's enough to open up for some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. That was a lot of information really quick. I was worried that an hour and a half was gonna be long. Like, I have a whole list of questions to add in and didn't have any opportunity to drop them, which is good because that gives us more content for future meetings. And so I guess just to conclude, just because we're kind of at time, if anyone else has a question they've been holding off for this question time, we could take maybe 1 to 2. I know at that time and just respecting everyone's schedule today. But just in general, we do want to set this up as a working group, which means that we want to meet multiple times. We want to dedicate this discussion to be open, to bring up valid points, bring up concerns, opportunities, come up with resources for everyone. And so just to kind of tie up all the loose ends of this, I'll go ahead and kind of set up a post-event survey just to get everyone's feedback, get everyone's next questions, top kind of priorities of what you think would be best to discuss with this group. And then we could figure out kind of a game plan of how we would like to kind of deploy the working group topics over the next few months. And so keep an eye out for that. But we do appreciate everyone getting on today. There's a lot of great information from a lot of different perspectives and shows that EVs are not just an allocated thing for one specific sector to concentrate on. It's affecting a lot of people. And so figuring out what programs other people have done first and then learning what their lessons have been, what barriers have they overcome, so you don't have to restart. You're not starting from scratch. There are some resources out there, and we want to lean on each other as peers in order to progress and be ready for the future. So I thank you all again. We did record this, and so we will send out that recording as well as a copy of the presentation. And then we will concordantly work up some kind of annotated notes just so it's a little easier to figure out what was all brought up. And then, like I mentioned before, one of the most important takeaways from this, if you guys do have that single point of contact that you guys would like for customers or anyone who inquires with us that we can forward on over for this specific topic, we would really appreciate that. We would love to start creating that kind of list out. And so if you want to just chat us that, or you could email me at bmuller@nctcog.org, that'd be great. But other than that, I appreciate you all getting on, and it was a great conversation. So we hope to continue this soon, probably in October. We'll set up that next time, so keep it on the lookout, and we'll get that set as soon as possible. But I appreciate everyone, and you guys have a good rest of your Friday and hopefully a good weekend.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, everyone.